In the summer of 1971, in the peaceful town of Princeton, New Jersey, a young teacher named Elisa Mae Quinn left her home in the morning and never returned. Her small house was left with the door open, the dining table still bearing an unfinished breakfast, but traces of Elisa vanished as if she had never existed. A large-scale search, suspects, conflicting testimonies, and years of despair turned that disappearance into the greatest obsession in the town's history. More than half a century later, when people thought time had buried the secret, an unexpected event occurred, reopening the door to the past and awakening memories that everyone wanted to forget. Before diving into this mysterious and haunting story, please hit subscribe to the channel to join us on the journey to uncover the truth forgotten for over 50 years. Princeton, New Jersey, August 1971. That summer carried the heavy scent of rain and mist, every morning damp and hazy, as if covered in a layer of steam from Lake Carnegie. In the small wooden house on Alexander Road, the kitchen light still filtered through the curtain as the sun just rose. William Quinn, a man in his 50s, carried a basket of baked goods and a jar of blueberry jam, the kind his daughter loved, and stepped onto the porch. He knocked on the door as usual, then waited, but there was no response from inside. The door was ajar. When he pushed it gently, the hinge let out a dry creak. The air in the house faintly smelled of black tea and oil paint. A kettle still sat on the stove. The boiled water evaporated, leaving a white ring around the rim. On the table, an open sketchbook lay unfinished, pencil lines half drawn of the lake and weeping willows. A thin shawl lay fallen on the floor, streaked with cobalt blue. William called softly, "Elisa." Then louder, but only the radio echoed from the living room. "The carpenter's close to you," drifting steadily, gently to the point of eeriness. Elisa Mae Quinn, 24 years old, was an art teacher at Riverside Elementary School. She lived alone in this house, about a 10-minute drive from her father's. The neighbors all knew Elisa, the petite girl with brown hair, passionate about painting, who often strolled around the lake every afternoon. Her life was peaceful, somewhat reclusive, but always orderly. William had never seen his daughter leave home without telling him. He walked through each room. The bed was neatly made, the closet untouched, missing only her purse and thin coat. On the windowsill, the lilac pot still held wet soil. On the wooden floor were a few small grains of sand and faint shoe prints, as if someone had entered after the rain the night before. William went to the backyard, called once more, his voice breaking amid the early birdsong. No answer. Back in the living room, he sat down on the chair. The wall clock read 7:45 a.m. on the table. An unfinished letter lay open, Elisa's handwriting trailing off, the last line abruptly cut at "everything will be." Beside it, a cooled teacup, the water sloshing lightly when he brushed against it. William felt his heart tighten. Everything in the house was familiar to the point of fear, only missing its owner. He stepped to the landline phone, dialed Elisa's colleague at school. On the other end, the woman said Elisa hadn't come to class yesterday, and hadn't called in sick. He was silent for a few seconds, then hung up, dialed another number. With a slight tremble in his hand, William called the Princeton police station. His voice was hoarse as he said briefly, his daughter had disappeared from home since last night, and he needed them there right away. Less than 20 minutes later, the first police car turned onto the small road leading to Elisa's wooden house. Red lights reflected off the dew-dotted maple leaves. Two young officers stepped out, greeted William, and listened to his account. No signs of struggle or theft, just a silence that made everything strangely off. Lieutenant Thomas Heller, the shift commander, arrived right after. He ordered the area sealed off, photos taken, and footprints lifted from the back steps. In his notebook, he wrote briefly, "Missing Elisa Mae Quinn, 24, last seen evening of August 17th. Heller called Mercer County headquarters, requesting an investigator. By noon, a middle-aged man appeared in a gray sedan, tie loose, carrying a leather briefcase. That was Detective Frank Marino, with over 15 years of experience in missing persons cases. Marino observed the house from the front yard. He crouched to look at the shoe prints on the back path, large size, mud still fresh. In the kitchen, the kettle bottom dry, teacup cold, indicating Elisa had woken in the night, or someone had been there early morning. On the dining table was a note saying, "Close back window." William said that window stuck, and could only be opened from inside. Marino signaled the tech team to lift fingerprints from the frame. stove handles, and dining table. 2 bloodhounds were brought in, sniffing around the porch, then heading down the small road toward Lake Carnegie. At the wet grass edge, they stopped, barked softly, then lost the scent. One found a piece of colored cardboard with a paint streak, the kind Elisa used in class. Marino picked it up, bagged it in evidence. He began to feel this was more than a voluntary departure. Police continued checking the backyard trash, and found a paper bag with torn sketches, all of Lake Carnegie scenes. One had heavy pencil scratches, unlike Elisa's usual light style. Marino noted, unstable mood before disappearance. By noon, Heller brought a report from the gas station 2 miles away. The owner confirmed around 8:30 p.m. on August 17. Elisa had stopped for gas, asked for a shortcut to downtown Princeton. She was alone, looked tired but calm. No one saw her after that. Marino decided to split the team, one group to sweep the route from the station to Washington Road Bridge, the other to check the lake shore where the dogs stopped. By midday, the small house was surrounded by yellow police line, "Do not cross" tape. Neighbors gathered, murmuring. They knew Elisa, the art teacher for kids, gentle and not very social. One woman said she heard a car stop, then start up last night, but didn't see the plates. A boy said he'd seen a strange man standing outside Elisa's fence a few days before. All statements were noted, but no clear leads yet. In the afternoon, light rain fell. The search team in boots combed the lake shore, using poles to probe low grass areas. No new traces. William stood on the porch, watching them, his face gaunt. Marino approached, placed a hand on his shoulder, said only briefly, "We'll find her." When the rain stopped, mud streaks around the yard spread, erasing the shoe prints. Marino requested final scene photos, then had them wrap up. On the way back, he flipped open his notebook, wrote Elisa Mae Quinn, missing August 17, 71. Traces back door open, men's shoe prints, 1969 Ford Falcon parked near bridge. Beside it, he added a small line, need to determine who Elisa left with. Exact time, reason back window open. As the car passed Lake Carnegie, the rain-muddied water reflected the pale gray afternoon light. Marino looked out the window, feeling like this disappearance was just beginning to unfold, and behind Princeton's quiet, something hid that he couldn't yet name. The next morning, the sky clear and cool, mist still veiling Lake Carnegie. At 7 o'clock, Detective Frank Marino and Lieutenant Heller returned to the scene to trace Elisa's possible route. The first stop was the gas station where she was last seen. The owner, Raymond Hines, recognized the photo right away. She drove an old light blue Falcon, bought 2 gallons of gas, asked for directions to downtown, then headed toward Washington Road Bridge. He remembered it had started drizzling, almost no other customers. Marino stood in the parking lot, looking down the road Elisa had taken. From here to her house was about 5 miles, 15 minutes. He had men sweep the route. Less than half an hour later, an officer shouted, "Found the Falcon," about 10 meters off the road, in tall grass. The light blue 1969 Ford Falcon Futura sat still, dotted with dew. Marino approached, examined closely. Car locked, no signs of break-in. He opened it with specialized tools, inside tidy purse, and papers intact, no money missing. On the passenger seat was a small sketch pad, a few colored pencils, and a leather bag. On the car mat, dry mud streaks with large shoe imprints, matching those at Elisa's house. He requested photos of every detail, samples of dirt from the mat and door handles. No signs of struggle, Heller said. Marino closed his notebook. Someone forced her to stop, or she pulled over to meet someone she knew. The area around the bridge was cordoned off. Tech team checked the water's edge and grass. An officer found a beige fabric scrap, caught on the metal fence, matching the material of Elisa's usual coat. Marino removed it, bagged it. Slight tire skid marks on the damp ground showed the car had just stopped, not been towed. Police swept another few hundred meters, but found no items or bloodstains. By noon, word of the car spread through Princeton. The Trentonian sent a reporter, but Marino refused details. In the temporary office, he reviewed scene photos. Everything too clean. Someone left the car like a question mark, he said quietly. The car was towed to the county impound. Technicians found a long dark hair caught on the passenger seatbelt, not matching Elisa's color. On the windshield, a faint handprint from outside. Marino ordered everything preserved in sealed envelopes. He thought Elisa might have stopped to talk to someone, then been taken away. In the afternoon, William Quinn was called to identify items. He looked at the leather bag, the wallet, the photo tucked inside, then bowed his head. "She never went far without telling me," he said softly. Marino nodded, said nothing. In the father's eyes, that car was the first evidence of something terrible. Late afternoon, rain returned. Marino sat in his car, opened the map, marked Elisa's route, house, gas station, bridge, where car stopped. Between the endpoint and the lake shore, just a few hundred meters. If she'd continued on foot, she'd reach the water's edge. He noted, car intact, no theft, high chance involving an acquaintance. That evening, at Princeton headquarters, Marino met with the investigative team. He requested checks on anyone around the lake evening of 8/17, bridge maintenance workers, fishermen, walkers, and even those who'd worked in Elisa's house, electricians, plumbers, close neighbors. "We need to know what she was afraid of," he said, recalling the unfinished line in Elisa's letter. Heller shrugged. "Maybe she just left for a few days." Marino looked at him, voice firm. "No one leaves behind a boiled dry kettle, and radio still on." Outside, the rain stopped, yellow street light glowing through the window. Marino flipped back to the Falcon photos. Body clean, no dust, no leaves, as if just washed. He crossed out the last line in his notebook. The car, the first clue, and also a reminder that Elisa didn't leave on her own. All traces were leading back toward Lake Carnegie. The next morning, the Mercer County forensics team returned to the small wooden house on Alexander Road to complete the evidence collection. The overnight rain had washed away the outdoor traces, but inside everything remained untouched since Elisa's disappearance was discovered. Detective Frank Marino stood by the window frame, looking out at the damp garden, his mind still replaying the image of the Falcon parked forlornly by the Washington Road Bridge. He believed the key lay in this very house, where everything seemed deliberately frozen at the final moment. On Elisa's desk, the technician found a stack of letters and a few loose sheets of paper. One envelope was stamped but without a recipient's address. When opened, inside was a folded sheet of paper, written in blue ink. The handwriting was neat, but the end trailed off. "I think everything will be okay, but sometimes there's a feeling that someone's looking through the back window." The sentence stopped mid-line. Without punctuation, the ink smudged at the word back, as if the writer's hand had trembled or been startled. Marino read it over and over, feeling his throat go dry. He remembered William saying Elisa often stayed up late drawing, and the back window overlooked the path leading down to the lake, a seldom traveled spot. He requested a photo of the letter, then placed it in a separate sealed bag. On the paper were faint partial fingerprint smudges, small but clearly not matching Elisa's prints that had been sampled earlier. The technician with the magnifying glass confirmed at least 2 different sets, one from Elisa, one unidentified. The back window, which Elisa mentioned in the letter, also had similar faint handprints, imprinted from the outside in. Those marks were long, larger than a woman's hand, appearing to be from a man. Marino stepped out to the backyard, where the path was hidden under the willow trees. The rain had softened and dampened the ground, but at the edge of the grass, there was still an indentation like a shoe print. He crouched down, measuring the width with a ruler. It matched almost perfectly with the shoe prints collected inside the house and on the Falcon's carpet. "Same person," he said quietly, then signaled for a photo. When he returned to the kitchen, he looked at the wall-mounted landline phone, its coiled cord intact, untouched that night. Elisa might not have had time to call anyone. In the living room, another technician was examining the curtain. At the fabric's edge, they discovered a broken thread and a patch of fine, unusual dust, like industrial wood dust. Marino noted, possibly from work boots. A thought flashed in his mind. Elisa had once called an electrician to fix the hallway light. William had mentioned it in the first interview. He flipped open his notebook, jotting down the names of those hired. One named Jacob Miller, living in the red brick house across from the lake. As the forensics team withdrew from the scene, the house fell empty again. Marino stood in the doorway, watching the slanted light through the window cast onto the wall, where Elisa had hung students' artwork. Some had faded, but there were still childish drawings of the lake, the road and the teacher's house. He felt something off, as if Elisa had known she was being watched, had sensed the danger, but no one had noticed. That afternoon, preliminary lab results arrived. The fingerprints on the letter and window weren't in the county police database. No priors, no matches to any records. Marino sat in the meeting room, under cold white fluorescent lights, listening to the report with a heavy heart. Everything circled back to square one, left with just the unfinished note and an unfinished sentence echoing like a whisper, "Someone's looking through the back window." That evening, he stopped by William's house to update him on the progress. The father sat at the dining table, still keeping Elisa's high school photo in a wooden frame. When he heard about the letter, he bowed his head slightly. She once said she sometimes felt uneasy. I told her not to work late, but she laughed, said it was just her imagination. Marino didn't know what to say, just looked around the empty house, the yellow lamplight covering everything in a layer of memory dust. Back in the car, he opened his notebook, adding a line, "Unfinished letter, male fingerprints, back window opened from inside." He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Elisa's house fade into the darkness. A part of him understood that, from the moment the letter was written, that woman had sensed something about to happen. And now, those lingering ink stains were the only clue connecting them to the truth hidden somewhere around Lake Carnegie. 2 days after discovering the unfinished letter and the strange fingerprints, Detective Frank Marino began reviewing the list of people who had visited Elisa's house. William's notebook only had 3 names: the heating oil delivery man, the plumber, and an electrician named Jacob Miller. This man lived over a mile from Elisa's, at the end of Harrison Road, near Lake Carnegie. In his 30s, single, self-employed, taking on odd repair jobs around the area. Neighbors described Miller as quiet, polite, but with eyes that lingered longer than necessary. On the morning of August 21st, Marino and Lieutenant Heller went to meet Miller. The small red brick house had a yard littered with tools and beer cans. When they knocked, Miller appeared sleepy-eyed, in a t-shirt stained with paint. Marino flashed his badge, "Princeton Police. We're investigating Elisa Quinn's disappearance. You were at her house, right?" Miller nodded. 2 weeks ago, she called me to replace the hallway bulb. It was a small job. Marino noticed small scratches on the man's arms. When asked, Miller said, "From fixing a drill." When requested to see his work log, he pulled out an old ledger. The page for August 17th, the night Elisa vanished, was blank. "I took the day off," Miller said, "stayed home watching the game." The answer was calm, but his eyes darted away. As they left the house, Marino paused by the porch. On the wooden table was a recent copy of the Trentonian, front page headline, "Teacher's Missing Car Found." Next to it was a toolbox containing beige paint powder, matching the fabric scrap found at the Washington Bridge fence. He took a photo, said nothing. That afternoon, Miller was invited to headquarters. In the interrogation room, he was cooperative but cool. When asked if he knew Elisa outside of work, Miller said, "Just small talk." Heller asked, "Did you see anyone lurking around her house lately?" "No, I just came, did the job, and left." But when Marino mentioned Elisa's unfinished letter, Miller hesitated briefly, asking back, "She wrote a letter." The tone was even, but his hand gripped the hem of his shirt tightly. Police requested fingerprints for comparison, and Miller hesitated a moment before agreeing. Preliminary results showed no match to the prints on the letter or window. Still, Marino didn't rule him out. "The perp might have worn gloves," he said quietly to Heller. "But this guy knows Elisa's habits, and lives right by the lake." Late afternoon, a new witness emerged. Mrs. Margaret White, the neighbor whose house overlooked the path behind Elisa's garden, stated, 2 or 3 nights before she disappeared, "I saw a flashlight moving between the trees. I thought it was a night fisherman." She described the person as tall, wearing a light-colored jacket, matching Miller's build. Marino obtained a search warrant for the house. The next day, police returned to Harrison Road. In Miller's garage, they found a pair of rubber boots, still caked in mud, an old flashlight, and a beige cloth rag, identical to the sample from the fence. When questioned, Miller said, "My work stuff. Mud's everywhere." Marino didn't respond, just asked the technician to take soil samples. A quick report from forensics showed the mud on the boots contained minerals characteristic of the soil around Lake Carnegie. Marino circled the line in the file, possible presence at the scene. However, without direct evidence tying to Elisa, no arrest warrant could be issued. That evening, Marino returned to the Washington Road Bridge. Lake Carnegie lay still under the moonlight, its surface reflecting streetlights like shattered glass. He stood silently, hearing insects mingled with the wind. In his mind, he replayed the night Elisa vanished, a woman stopping her car, opening the door to talk to someone, then leaving the pavement, possibly with someone she knew. Marino opened his notebook, jotting a few short lines. Jacob Miller, electrician, visited victim's house. Indicators: mud-caked boots, lives near lake, opportunity. Need to verify alibi and witness Margaret White. A cold wind from the lake made the paper tremble slightly. Marino closed the notebook, started the car. He knew he had his first suspect, but a nagging feeling lingered. If Miller was innocent, then who was the man whose handprint was on the window? And why had Elisa written that final line, like a prophecy of her own disappearance? On the morning of August 24th, while the file on Jacob Miller still sat on his desk, Detective Frank Marino received a call from Lieutenant Heller. 2 new witnesses had come forward voluntarily. One was Ed Barnes, a Washington Road Bridge maintenance worker. The other was Rachel Porter, a Princeton University senior, who jogged around the lake every evening. These 2 accounts, which seemed poised to bolster the theory about Miller, instead veered the case in a new direction, more tangled and contradictory than ever. Barnes recounted that, on the night of August 17th, around 9 o'clock, he was checking the bridge's floodlights when he saw a car pulled over on the shoulder. A light blue Falcon. I remember because its headlights were flickering, probably about to fail, he said. Barnes insisted he saw a tall man in a light-colored jacket approach the driver's side door, then the car's engine shut off. I thought they were arguing. The girl in the car yelled something, then went quiet. He didn't approach, thinking it was private, and a few minutes after he turned away, the car was gone from sight. That statement immediately made Marino think of Miller, similar height, light jacket, living near the lake. But when he showed Rachel Porter a photo of Miller, she shook her head. Not him. Rachel said that evening, she was heading back to her dorm late, and walked across the bridge around 8:45. I saw the car parked on the shoulder, interior lights on, a woman in the driver's seat, door open, and a man standing right next to it. He was wearing dark clothes, seemed to have short hair, not very tall. She added that seconds later, the man patted the roof like a goodbye wave, then turned onto the bridge, heading toward downtown Princeton. 2 statements. 2 completely different images. One saw light clothes, tall build, the other described dark clothes, shorter. Marino listened, noted every detail, then fell silent for a long moment. Both are telling the truth, he remarked. But only one of them has the right timing. Heller tilted his head. What do you mean? Marino pointed to the map spread on the table. If Rachel saw the car at 8:45, and Barnes at 9 o'clock, that means in those 15 minutes, 2 men approached the same car. She might have caught Elisa while she was still alive, and Barnes saw it after. The room went quiet. Marino decided to meet William Quinn again to confirm if Elisa knew anyone matching Rachel's description. William thought for a moment, then said, maybe an old student, Alan Pierce, who took her art class. The kid now works at the Princeton library. That name made Marino note it immediately. He went to the university, met Pierce, a 26-year-old with glasses, skinny build, tense demeanor. He confirmed seeing Elisa a few times recently, to have her look over some sketches. When asked about the evening of August 17th, Pierce said he was at the library until 9:30, but no one could verify it. That night, Marino sat alone in his office, rereading all the statements. Miller said he stayed home watching the game, unverified. Pierce said he was at the library, unseen by anyone. One had indicators around the lake, one had reason to meet Elisa, both could be the man in light or dark clothes. He felt stuck between 2 mismatched images, like 2 film overlays with no overlap. Forensics sent new results. The faint handprint on the Falcon's window glass was nearly proportional to Miller's palm frame, but not clear enough for a conclusion. Meanwhile, the shoe print from Elisa's backyard nearly matched the length of Alan Pierce's shoes. Marino circled 2 lines, then crossed them out, writing in the margin, all evidence is half-baked, not enough to arrest anyone. not enough to clear anyone. The next morning, the local paper ran a story. 2 witnesses provide new clues in young teacher's disappearance. The news stirred up the Princeton community. Heller read the article, sighed. Now the whole town thinks Miller's the perp. Marino replied softly. Sometimes, public opinion moves faster than the truth. That afternoon, he returned to Lake Carnegie. Late summer winds blew strong, rippling the water in small waves. He stood on the bridge, looking down where the Falcon had once parked. In his mind, he pieced together the timeline. 8:45, Elisa still talking to someone, possibly an acquaintance. 9 o'clock, another person arrived, then she vanished. 2 men, 2 directions, 2 conflicting statements. One of them was lying, and the truth lay somewhere in those 15 minutes, the span of time enough for a person to disappear without a trace. On August 25, after a week of deadlock, the search for Elisa Mae Quinn was expanded across the entire Carnegie Lake area. Princeton police coordinated with Mercer County forces and the volunteer rescue team, totaling more than 50 people, divided into 4 groups with motorboats, police dogs, and metal detectors. The news made the front page of the Trentonian with a large headline, "Search for Missing Teacher Expands Around Lake." The normally peaceful small town was now bustling, with residents carrying binoculars standing along the lake shore to watch. Detective Frank Marino was there early. He and Lieutenant Heller were in charge of the northern group, the area with dense forest and steep banks. The sun rose, the mist cleared, the water surface sparkled. She could have slipped down, Heller said. Marino shook his head. If so, why was the car locked and the lights in the house still on? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The dive team swept the lake bottom with buoys and anchors marking spots. Motorboats ran parallel, pulling up entire rotten branches and rusted metal scraps, nothing related to Elisa. On shore, the groups combed through every bush, crevice, discovering a few wet fabric scraps, a paint-smeared drawing paper, but unable to determine the origin. By midday the sun was harsh, the searchers fatigued. Marino stood under the willow shade, looking at the calm water flow, feeling like this place was trying to hide something. Just as he was about to call a break, a young officer ran up. Suspicious item found south of the lake, near the reed bed. The group moved immediately. In the tall grass, they found a beige scarf, mud-stained, matching the fabric type collected from the bridge railing. Marino bent down to pick it up with gloves. A faint paint smell mixed with damp earth scent. "Looks like the kind she often wore," he said. The scarf was sealed, evidence numbered. Under the thick grass layer, there were faint shoe prints heading toward the forest. Heavy steps, clearly a man's. The group expanded the search in that direction, but the shoe prints vanished after a few dozen meters, where the ground was hard and covered with dry leaves. An officer whispered. He might have gotten in a car on the main road. Marino didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the forest expanse, where mist was rising like smoke. He had a hunch that the guy was still around here, silently watching every move they made. In the afternoon, the team returned to the temporary command post in the parking lot. On the map, the areas were marked crisscrossed. Heller said tiredly, "All day, and we only found 1 scarf." Marino nodded slightly. Sometimes, 1 item is enough to tell the story. He requested sending the fabric sample to the lab for comparison with the hair fibers found in the Falcon car. As dusk fell, the wind picked up, ripples forming on the lake's surface. Boat lights reflected long streaks on the water. The residents still hadn't left, a few bringing flowers to place on the bridge railing. "Poor teacher," an old lady whispered. Marino passed by, heard it but didn't stop. He knew that those words of sympathy would sooner or later turn into gossip. In the evening, the TV news aired a short interview with William Quinn. He sat on the porch, his face gaunt. "I just hope they find my daughter, in whatever condition." Marino watched the news in the break room, his coffee cup in hand gone cold. William's eyes, both desperate and hopeful, weighed heavy on him. Night fell, the search temporarily halted. Marino lingered by the lake shore, where lights reflected on the dark water surface. In the distance, the Washington Bridge loomed faintly in the mist, where the Falcon had been found. He tried to piece together the timeline. 8:45, Elisa was still talking to someone. 9 o'clock, another person appeared, then she vanished. 2 witnesses, 2 directions of statements, and now the added scarf, each detail like scattered pieces of an incomplete puzzle. Marino pulled out his notebook, jotting briefly, "Scarf found at reed bed south of Carnegie Lake, afternoon of 8/25, shoe prints heading into forest, victim possibly led away via waterside trail. He closed the notebook, looking at the still lake surface. In the peacefulness of Princeton, that night seemed longer than usual, and Marino knew that from the moment the scarf was found, Elisa Quinn's disappearance was no longer just a simple search. In September 1971, the search operation for Elisa Mae Quinn officially concluded without results. The scarf was the final evidence. No body, no new witnesses, no specific traces. The case file was transferred to open investigation status, but everyone understood it had begun to cool off. Princeton police held a faint belief that Elisa might still be alive somewhere, but as years passed, that hope faded along with the subsequent winters. In 1972, Jacob Miller was released from surveillance, due to no direct evidence found. He left Princeton, moving to Trenton to work for an electrical supply company, and Alan Pierce, Elisa's former student, also left the university, leaving no contact address. When asked, his friend said Pierce became withdrawn and avoided everyone after the disappearance was mentioned in the press. The names that once made Marino suspicious now only remained in old dusty files. William Quinn stayed in the small house on Alexander Road. Every morning, he brewed tea and turned on the radio, waiting for some news bulletin to mention his daughter, but it never came. Elisa's paintings still hung all over the walls, the wooden frames fading with time. He refused to sell the house, telling neighbors that she'll come back and needs a place to return to. In 1975, William's health weakened, but he still regularly went to Carnegie Lake every afternoon, sitting by the bridge where the Falcon was found, as if just sitting long enough, the water would give him back the answer. For the police, the Elisa Quinn case gradually became a footnote in the list of unsolvable cases. Detective Frank Marino transferred to the Special Investigations Unit in Trenton, but in his desk drawer, he still kept a copy of the unfinished letter and a photo of Elisa's house from the first day he arrived. On many night shifts, he opened the old envelope, looked at the faded words, "Someone is watching through the back window," then folded it back. She knew she was being stalked. He once said to Heller, in a 1976 meeting, "We just arrived too late." Throughout the 1970s, Princeton changed slowly. The paper mill by the lake closed, wooden houses replaced by rows of new brick ones. Residents rarely mentioned the disappearance, except on a few anniversary occasions in the local paper. Whenever someone said the young teacher who went missing back then, people would shake their heads, their voices lowering. Some believed Elisa was kidnapped by someone, others thought she left on her own for personal reasons, but they all agreed on one thing: no one truly believed she was still alive. In 1978, William Quinn passed away. In the small room, police found a wooden box containing all of Elisa's paintings and journals. The final page had a line written in his trembling hand: "If anyone finds her, please tell her that Dad never stopped waiting." Marino was notified. He attended the funeral quietly, not in uniform. That day it was a light rain, just like the morning he first stepped into the house. From then on, the Elisa Mae Quinn case officially fell into oblivion. The file was archived in the Mercer County Police Department warehouse, case number 71-482, with the note "Missing, cause unknown." No one asked about it anymore. No more press coverage. No one came to Carnegie Lake to search. Only sometimes, nighttime fishermen said they heard a faint singing voice from across the shore, a woman's hazy voice in the mist. Police never verified it, but for Marino, whenever he heard it mentioned, he just looked distant and said softly, "Sometimes, the coldest cases are the ones that never really end." The 1980s passed. Princeton changed slowly. Carnegie Lake was now a strolling spot for students and tourists, and Elisa Mae Quinn's disappearance, only a faded memory. The small house on Alexander Road changed owners several times, but locals said they sometimes still heard the Carpenters' music on the radio from the attic. No one knew if it was real, or just the wind blowing through the old wooden frames. Case file 71-482 gathered dust in the Mercer County Police Department archives. No one opened it again. Frank Marino was then over 50, gray-haired, transferred back to Trenton. He no longer investigated directly, but Elisa's unfinished letter still lay in his desk drawer. Sometimes, on late-night shifts, he opened it, read the ink-smeared line, "Someone is watching through the back window," then wondered if he'd missed something. "There are cases that don't close," he wrote in his notebook. "They just wait for someone patient enough to listen." In the summer of 1981, a dredging crew at the lake discovered a few rusted items, a worn silver ring, decayed fabric scraps, a wooden frame carved with EQ. The press mentioned Elisa's case for a few days, but lab results confirmed nothing. Marino drove to the lake, stood silently looking at the flat water surface, then quietly left. For him it was just memory knocking at the door. In 1984, when automated fingerprint matching technology was implemented in New Jersey, young Lieutenant Dale Weaver found Elisa's file in the old warehouse. This case was never entered into the system, he asked. Marino smiled sadly. No one remembered any more. Weaver suggested rescanning the fingerprints from the old letter and window frame. The results yielded nothing new, the prints too faint to confirm, but at least the case was mentioned again internally. Some local papers reprinted Elisa's photo in the open files section, stirring the town. People who once knew Elisa sent letters to the police station. Former students, colleagues, neighbors. They wrote about the gentle drawing teacher, who liked wearing beige scarves, and often sat by the lake sketching. Marino read each letter, folded it, and filed it in a separate folder. For him it was proof that Elisa had existed, not just a name in a cold file. By the late 1980s, the name Jacob Miller resurfaced. The 1971 prime suspect was arrested in Trenton for assaulting a neighbor. When police discovered his link to Elisa's case, the press immediately dug up the old story. Marino, by then retired, was asked for comment. He only said, "There was no evidence against Miller, and it's probably too late to find any now." Miller was later released, then left the state, vanishing like before. However, the incident made Dale Weaver, now the lead investigator, decide to reopen the file. He sought out Marino, asking for the original letter and old samples. "I want to enter all the data into the new system," he said. Marino handed over the envelope, his eyes a mix of hope and caution. Weaver replied, "I'm not sure I'll solve it, but at least she won't be forgotten." In the winter of 1990, in his small apartment in Trenton, Marino sat by the window, listening to "Close to You" on the radio. The melody pulled him back to the summer morning of 1971, when he stepped through Elisa's door and saw the kettle boiled dry. He said softly to himself, "Maybe everything will be okay, just not in our lifetime." Outside, light snow fell, blanketing the road leading back to Princeton, where 20 years earlier, a woman drove her green Falcon into the mist and never returned. In early 1991, the Mercer County Police Department's office conducted a review of all backlog files from the 1970s to prepare for transfer to a new digital storage system. In a list of more than 400 cases, File 71, 482, Elisa Mae Quinn appeared with a cold notation, "No progress, archive permanently." The storage room was in the old basement of the building, with damp, moldy walls and dim yellow lights. Two young employees stacked boxes of files onto iron shelves. Amid countless stacks of yellowed paper, Elisa's file stood out due to the faded red seal. One of the two looked up and asked, "Keep or destroy?" The supervisor replied curtly, "Keep. No victim's body can't close completely." And so the case was transferred to the last compartment of rack number 4, the place reserved for cases no one expected to ever reopen. That same year, Detective Frank Marino officially retired after more than 30 years on the job. Before leaving the station, he went to the storage room for one last look. On the cold shelves, hundreds of files were neatly stacked, but only one made him pause. He lightly touched the old paper cover, feeling the thick layer of dust on his fingertips. "Does it all end here?" he whispered without waiting for an answer. Before leaving, Marino signed a request for long-term preservation of the file, with a handwritten note added, "Potential for future DNA technology development, so keep evidence intact." That note, at the time, went unnoticed by anyone, but many years later it became the sole reason Elisa Quinn's file was kept intact. After Marino retired, the case was officially labeled a cold case. No longer any investigator in charge, no more budget to continue. All the evidence, the unfinished letter, the scarf, the strand of hair, the fingerprints, were sealed in a metal box, stored in the county warehouse. On the lid of the box, the red wax seal stamped 1991, closed nearly 20 years of fruitless searching. In Princeton, hardly anyone mentioned the name Elisa anymore. The elementary school where she once taught had been renovated. The class photo with her face in the old frame was removed during a remodel and replaced with a new photo of the next generation of teachers. The children from back then had grown up and scattered everywhere. Sometimes, Someone passing by the Washington Road Bridge, looking down at the still water of the lake, would whisper, "A girl disappeared here long ago." But that story now was just like a rumor from an old town, and in Trenton, Frank Marino lived quietly in a small apartment. He wrote short articles for a police magazine about investigative procedures, but most of his time he spent collecting old files. He had a strange habit. Every summer, when mist rose from Lake Carnegie, he would drive back to Princeton, stand on the bank of the old bridge, and look down at the water. "We missed something," he would often tell himself. Each time, he carried a copy of Elisa's letter in his shirt pocket, folded carefully. At the same time, Dale Weaver, the young investigator from back then, was promoted and put in charge of the new Digital Archives Department. While reviewing the list of sealed cases, he came across the name Elisa Mae Quinn. Weaver immediately remembered the woman in the black and white photo that Marino had once shown him, the petite girl with a gentle smile and eyes cast down as if looking at something only she could see. He looked up the information again, but the file was marked inaccessible, original documents sealed. Weaver wrote a handwritten letter to Marino, thanking him for the guidance from years ago, with a small line added, "The Quinn case is still in storage. I'll keep it as you instructed." In December of that year, Trenton's weather turned cold early. Marino sat by the window, reading Weaver's letter, then smiled faintly. In the dim yellow lamplight, he placed Elisa's old envelope in the drawer and closed it. He knew he no longer had the strength to search for anything more, but he also understood that one day, someone younger, more patient, would reopen that sealed box, and then, the silence that had lasted 20 years around Lake Carnegie might finally be broken. In 1998, the New Jersey State Police officially joined the FBI's National CODIS DNA database. A series of old cases were reviewed, including File 71-482, Elisa Mae Quinn, which had been sealed for nearly 20 years. A new employee, Linda Morales, noticed Frank Marino's handwritten note while inventorying the files. "Keep evidence, may be usable for future DNA analysis." Linda reported it to her superiors, and the case was transferred to the State Forensics Lab for examination. In September 1999, the metal box containing the evidence was opened in the presence of Mercer County Police. The red wax seal cracked open, revealing the scarf, the letter, and the long strand of hair stuck to the tin foil. The lab proceeded to extract a DNA sample, the first time since 1971. 6 weeks later, the results came back. The sample was DNA from an unidentified male, not previously appearing in the CODIS system. No match, but the data was stored with a unique code, in case it could be compared later. That information reached Lieutenant Dale Weaver, who had once apprenticed under Marino. He remembered his promise to his mentor, that he wouldn't let the case be forgotten. Weaver formed a team to review the old files, looking for connections between the DNA sample and the two suspects once mentioned, Jacob Miller, the electrician, and Alan Pierce, Elisa's former student. Neither had DNA on file from criminal records, but Miller had been arrested in Trenton in 1989, so a blood sample was stored. The result no match. Weaver was disappointed, but he understood. At least now they had real biological evidence. In the early 2000s, STR short tandem repeat technology allowed for more accurate DNA identification. Weaver had the hair and scarf samples retested with the new technique. In 2005, the lab confirmed the DNA belonged to a male, estimated age 20-35 in 1971, but not specific enough to identify. He noted, "Keep sample, await development of genetic genealogy technology." In the spring of 2005, Weaver visited Frank Marino at the Trenton nursing home, now over 70. He brought a printout of the new results. Marino smiled faintly. "I told you, DNA will find her, not us." That statement haunted Weaver for many years afterward. After Marino passed away in 2006, Weaver took over responsibility for the file. He digitized all the original documents, photos, and crime scene diagrams, creating the first electronic file for the Elisa Quinn case in the state's cold case database. The old samples were resealed and stored at the New Jersey Forensics Center, marked priority for reanalysis with new technology. By 2010, when familial DNA techniques, identifying genetic relatives, were being tested, Weaver submitted a request to include the Quinn sample in the pilot program. In November of that year, the initial results revealed the DNA had a distant relation to two people in Pennsylvania, from a family line that had lived around Princeton in the 1960s. No specific identity, but this was the first lead. After nearly 40 years, Weaver stood by the window in his office, looking at the map of Princeton on the wall, where he had marked in red pen the location where the Falcon was found years ago. The last line in his report read, "Initial identification of distant genetic relationship. Need to track technology development to expand tracing." At the end of December 2010, Weaver returned to Lake Carnegie. The weather was cold, the lake surface covered in thin ice. He took from his shirt pocket the copy of Elisa's letter that Marino had once kept, rereading the interrupted line, "I think everything will be okay." Then he whispered, like a promise to the past, "We're still looking." As he left, snow began to fall lightly, covering the grass and the bridge where the Falcon had once stopped, where the old path of a disappearance, nearly half a century long, had begun to open a new direction, thanks to a tiny strand of hair. In early 2023, after more than half a century, File 71-482, Elisa Mae Quinn was reopened. The New Jersey State Police had just established the Cold Case Review Unit, specializing in using forensic genealogy technology to solve old cases. Lieutenant Karen Holt, Weaver's former student, was assigned to lead it. In the first meeting, Holt placed the black and white photo of Elisa on the table. "This is the longest-running case still holding DNA samples. We'll start over." Weaver, now retired, was invited as a consultant. He sat quietly listening as Holt presented the plan, "Rescan all the evidence with next-generation sequencing, NGS technology, the new gene decoding system that allows for more detailed DNA structure identification." The male hair sample collected from the Falcon and the piece of scarf were sent to a lab collaborating with open genealogy databases like GED Match and Family Tree DNA. Just 3 weeks later, the first results stunned the team. The DNA had a second-degree relative match to a man named Michael Dunham, living in Erie, Pennsylvania. When contacted, Michael said, "I don't know anyone named Elisa Quinn, but my father lived in Princeton in the 1970s. Genealogical data showed the Dunham family had 3 brothers of the same generation, Thomas, Richard, and Edward, all born between 1944, 1950, and once residing around Princeton at the time of Elisa's disappearance." Holt focused on Thomas Dunham, the eldest brother, who had worked as a utility maintenance worker and had a minor criminal record in 1972 before moving to Pennsylvania. That detail matched the description of work boot prints and industrial wood dust in Marino's 1971 report. When Weaver heard the name, he just nodded slightly. She had hired an electrician, could be him. In April 2023, police obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Thomas. 2 weeks later, the lab confirmed a 99.94% match with the sample on the scarf and hair in Elisa's car. Holt looked at the computer screen, her voice trembling slightly. "We found him." Thomas Dunham, then 79 years old, lived alone in the suburbs of Erie. The day police knocked on his door, he seemed calm, saying he only knew about that disappearance from the newspapers. But when Holt presented the DNA results, his face changed completely. "I didn't kill anyone," Dunham said. "I just gave her a ride home." That statement caught the investigators' attention, because in the files, he himself had been the one Elisa hired to fix her wiring before she vanished. When questioned about the night of August 17, 1971, Dunham claimed he met Elisa near the bridge because her car was out of gas, but the investigation showed the gas tank was full and the car doors were intact. Upon cross-checking, the faint handprint on Elisa's home window partially matched Dunham's old fingerprints from the 1972 file. When Holt asked, "You came back to her house that night, didn't you?" Dunham fell silent, looked down at the table, and then said quietly, "It's been too long." That answer was enough to pave the way for an official arrest warrant. Due to the excessive time elapsed, and the victim not yet found, the case was classified as a historic homicide, murder under special circumstances. The state prosecutor's office concluded that the chain of DNA evidence and indirect statements were sufficient for indictment. On May 22, 2023, police announced the results at a press conference. Weaver, with his hair now snow white, was in the front row. He looked at Elisa's photo, his voice choked. 52 years, but she never left our files. As Thomas Dunham was led away from his home, the press reported it en masse. 1971 disappearance, Solved after 52 years, Princeton residents flocked to Lake Carnegie, bringing flowers to place on the Washington Bridge railing, where the falcon had once been found. In the afternoon light, the wind blew across the gently rippling water, reflecting the floating petals. That evening, Holt and Weaver returned to the bridge. She opened a small notebook with a handwritten copy of Elisa's letter, reading the last line, "I think everything will be okay." Then she whispered, "You've been hurt, Elisa." Weaver stood beside her, his gaze directed down at the dark lake surface. In the stillness of Princeton, they understood that, after more than half a century, the mystery of the woman who disappeared in 1971 had finally closed, not just through technology, but through the promise of people who never stopped searching. When Thomas Dunham's DNA results were announced, the entire investigative team thought the case was closed. But just a few weeks later, the New Jersey State Forensics Lab sent an additional report that left everyone stunned. The DNA on the 1971 scarf didn't belong to just one person. Alongside Dunham's DNA, the experts discovered a second male genetic profile, completely different. The data was entered into the expanded forensic genealogy system, and just a few days later, the results produced a familiar name, Alan Pierce, the former student of Elisa Mae Quinn. Lieutenant Karen Holt was stunned as she read the report. Weaver, who had interrogated Pierce back in 1971, just shook his head slightly. "We cleared him too soon." The investigative team immediately verified it. Alan Pierce had died in 2015, but Princeton Hospital still had his genetic sample on file because he had participated in a research blood donation program. When the comparison results came back, the number on the screen was undeniable, a 99.9% match with the secondary DNA on the scarf. According to old records, Pierce was an art student in 1971, enrolled in the drawing class taught by Elisa. He was quiet, sensitive, and often stayed after class to chat. Some classmates said he seemed too infatuated with the teacher. When Elisa disappeared, Pierce was briefly interrogated and then released due to lack of evidence. After that, he left Princeton, worked in advertising in Philadelphia, and lived single until his death. No one suspected he was the missing piece of the puzzle for over half a century. As they reviewed the evidence, Holt noticed many old details suddenly made sense. The unfinished letter Elisa had written had a smudged ink blot, and under ultraviolet light, the technicians could make out faint letters resembling an A. The handprint on her house window, previously overlooked because it was unclear, was now confirmed to partially match Pierce's fingerprints from his school registration. Weaver fell silent. "She tried to warn us from the start. No one just understood." Holt believed it was highly likely that Elisa and Pierce had a private relationship, and a conflict arose on the night she disappeared. Thomas Dunham, the electrician, might have just happened to show up afterward, helping Pierce cover his tracks. This explained why both men's DNA appeared on the evidence, and why Elisa's falcon was parked neatly as if staged by someone. In July 2023, the investigative team submitted the updated file to the state prosecutor's office. After review, the authorities decided to shift the charges. Thomas Dunham was no longer prosecuted for murder, but for concealing evidence and the body, while Alan Pierce was identified as the primary suspect, deceased before he could be charged. Holt read the press release at a brief press conference. "The truth doesn't disappear. It just gets buried in time." The media immediately reported it. Princeton residents were shocked. No one expected the person involved to be that gentle student from back then. Some of Elisa's former students sent letters to the police station, recounting how she had been worried about an old student showing up at her house at night. That information now matched everything the DNA confirmed. That evening, Holt and Weaver returned to Carnegie Lake. The water was still, the wind blowing ripples across it like the long breaths of the past. Holt said softly, "Maybe he didn't mean to kill her, but fear made everything go too far." Weaver replied in a low voice, "She just wanted to be remembered, not as a victim, but as the one who kept us searching." They stood by the bridge railing, watching the lights reflect on the lake, where the case had begun over 50 years ago. In silence, Holt took out her notebook and copied Elisa's unfinished letter, reading the last line softly. "I think everything will be okay." Weaver replied quietly, "And now it is." The wind blew gently over the lake, carrying a few petals falling into the water. After more than half a century, the two names once linked to Elisa Mae Quinn's disappearance were finally called to their rightful places, one the perpetrator, one the concealer. But more importantly, the young woman who vanished in 1971 had gotten what she deserved. The truth late, but complete. News of the DNA results and the true identity of the suspect made Princeton wake up after more than half a century of forgetting. The morning after the press conference, every local newspaper ran the headline, "The 1971 Disappearance. Truth After 52 Years." On television, images of Elisa Mae Quinn with her gentle smile were replayed alongside portraits of Alan Pierce, the gentle student from back then, now identified as directly involved in the tragedy. The news spread quickly, from small coffee shops in the town center to the suburbs, everyone mentioning the name Elisa Quinn, the woman who became a symbol of justice that never sleeps. By the Washington Road Bridge, where the Falcon had been found, Princeton residents set up a small memorial table, white flowers, candles and cards with the words, "Elisa, you've finally been found." Princeton University students launched a Justice for Elisa page sharing the entire investigation process and calling for funds to erect a memorial plaque at the elementary school where she once taught. In a few days, thousands visited, leaving messages. The truth came late but never lost. At restaurants and coffee shops around the center, the story of Alan Pierce became hot topic. Former classmates, neighbors or colleagues couldn't believe it. He was always calm, polite, never raised his voice, one woman said on television. Others fell silent. No one knew what was inside him. Social media was flooded with comments, mostly expressing outrage that Pierce had hidden his crime for decades. But mixed in were words of sympathy. Maybe he regretted it, just didn't have the courage to say so. Pierce's family, who had left Princeton long ago, suddenly became the focus. His niece, who had assisted the police, made a brief statement, "We knew nothing about this. We just hope Elisa's soul rests in peace, and that people understand some secrets no one wants to carry to the end of their life." Her words softened public opinion somewhat, but shock still enveloped the town. As for Thomas Dunham, who had been wrongly suspected for half a century, the news was a belated release. He was cleared of all charges and freed. As he stepped out of the courthouse, he said softly, "I didn't kill her, I just helped hide something I didn't fully understand. Now I just hope she forgives me." The image of the frail old man, trembling before the cameras, silenced the community. Between guilt and atonement, no one dared judge anymore. The elementary school, where Elisa once taught, held a small memorial. Her students from back then, now over 60, returned to the old classroom, placing an old photo and a bouquet of white flowers on her desk. One said emotionally, "She taught us to draw light. Now I understand she meant the light of truth." The administration announced the Elisa Mae Quinn Memorial Fund Scholarship for art students, a way to ensure her name was never forgotten. National media quickly jumped in. True crime programs praised the case as evidence of the power of DNA and genetic genealogy. One reporter wrote, "From a tiny hair, half a century of silence was illuminated." The Elisa Quinn case became a textbook example in forensics seminars, reigniting faith that justice, no matter how slow, can still emerge. But along with the joy, came a series of unanswered questions. How did Elisa die? Where is her body? Why didn't Pierce confess while alive? In an interview, Lieutenant Karen Holt said simply, "We can decode DNA, but we can't decode human fear. Some secrets will stay sunk beneath the lake." That statement closed all debates, leaving a quiet sadness. On the night of August 15, 2023, exactly 52 years after Elisa's disappearance, hundreds gathered by Carnegie Lake to light memorial candles. Golden light stretched across the water, reflecting like countless stars. Holt and Weaver stood together in the crowd. "She made a whole generation believe justice still exists," Holt said softly. Weaver replied, "And that memory, if held long enough, can become justice." The ceremony ended in silence. Bells from Princeton University echoed over the lake, the night wind making the candles flicker. Residents said they heard the wind like Elisa's farewell. In the dim light, the Washington Bridge, where it all began, reflected down into the still water, as if reminding that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts, but from the unextinguished faith in people's hearts. And for that small town, after more than half a century, the Elisa Mae Quinn disappearance wasn't just a solved murder, but proof that memory, if preserved, can illuminate the longest darkness. In the fall of 2023, a few months after the memorial by Carnegie Lake, Lieutenant Karen Holt decided to visit the family of Frank Marino, the first investigator in charge of the Elisa Mae Quinn case. He had passed away nearly 2 decades earlier, but his son Paul Marino still lived in Trenton in the small house where his father had kept the old files. When Holt called to ask permission, Paul's voice choked. "My father said he never left the Elisa Quinn case his whole life. If you want to see what he left behind, come over." The Marino family home sat at a quiet street corner, its tiled roof covered in golden leaves. Paul greeted her with a kind smile, thin build, eyes like his father's. In the old study, everything was intact: the wooden desk, the yellowish desk lamp, the Princeton map with red pins marking the search areas from 1971. On the desk was a small metal box labeled EMQ, short for Elisa Mae Quinn. Paul said he kept it until the end, wouldn't let anyone touch it. When Holt opened the box, inside were a few black and white photos, scraps of notepaper, and a sealed envelope. Marino's handwriting was clear: "If this case is ever solved one day, remember she never really disappeared." Below it in smaller letters, "No technology can replace instinct. I believe someone was closer to Elisa than we thought. When they find the DNA, they'll understand what I once felt." Those lines were written in 1991, 15 years before he died. Paul recounted that in his final years, his father still visited Carnegie Lake every month, bringing flowers and unsent letters. He believed she was still somewhere. "My father said, if he'd held Alan Pierce a little longer back then, things might have been different." Holt fell silent, feeling heavy-hearted. She knew that feeling well, the obsession of an investigator with an unsolved case. In the box was also a worn leather-bound notebook. The first line read, "August 18, 1971, the house silent to the point of eerie." Flipping through the pages, Holt read quick notes: "Kettle still boiling, back window open, table has an unfinished letter, someone once stood outside the window frame." These notes didn't appear in the official files. They were just Marino's instincts, but they matched details later confirmed by DNA. Holt said softly, "He sensed the perpetrator. He just didn't have enough evidence." Paul pulled from the drawer a photo of his father by Carnegie Lake, holding a bouquet of white daisies. In the corner of the photo, Marino had written, "One day the lake will give back the truth." Holt looked at it for a long time, her heart swelling with emotion and gratitude. This man had kept the flame alive for over 30 years, so the next generation could continue the journey. Before leaving, Holt asked permission to take the notebook to make a copy. Paul nodded. "My father would be glad to know it's still being used to finish the story." She thanked him and left the house in the pale golden autumn sun. On the drive back to Princeton, Holt thought of those who came before, people with only instinct and determination, no modern technology, but who held on with the belief that the truth wouldn't stay buried forever. That evening, Holt returned to the office and placed the notebook on the desk next to the closed file. When she opened the last page, she saw scribbled pencil words: "If anyone reads this, tell her we're still looking." Holt smiled faintly, whispering, "We found her, Mr. Marino." The next day, Holt organized a small gathering between veteran investigators and new officers from the Mercer County Police Department. She told them about Marino, the man who laid the foundation for the journey spanning over half a century. Many were moved, especially the young officers who had never seen a case last a lifetime. "The biggest lesson," Holt said, "isn't in technology, but in not letting the victim's memory be forgotten." When the meeting ended, she opened the Princeton map on the wall and pinned a green tack at Carnegie Lake. "This," she said, "is where it all began and ended. But also from here, we understand that justice only lives when someone holds the faith." The room fell silent for a few seconds, a heavy silence. Late that night, Holt walked to the lake. The air was crisp, the bridge lights reflecting on the water. She stood right where Marino had taken the old photo, gently placing a bouquet of white daisies down, watching the petals drift farther away. "You were right," she said softly. "The lake gave back the truth." The autumn wind blew gently, rippling the water, as if someone was smiling faintly. Holt closed her eyes, listening to the soft sound of the wind, feeling a peace that had been rare throughout her career. In that moment, she realized what Marino Weaver, and all those who pursued the case had chased: not just catching the criminal, but preserving the memory of the disappeared, so they could live on, even if only in the truth rediscovered. And as she left, the moonlight reflecting on Carnegie Lake formed the faint silhouette of a smiling woman, as if Elisa Mae Quinn had finally found peace. Early in 2024, as the echoes of the Elisa Mae Quinn case began to fade, Lieutenant Karen Holt received a call from the Cumberland County Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania. The caller was a supervisory officer at the facility, saying that an elderly inmate wanted to meet with her privately. He claimed to know the real truth about the Elisa Quinn case. The name made Holt freeze. Jacob Miller, the electrician who had been the first suspect back in 1971, now 80 years old. After more than half a century of silence, why did he want to speak out now? 3 days later, Holt arrived at the facility with a young investigator. In the visitation room, Miller was frail, with snow-white hair and deep, weary eyes. When he saw Holt, he nodded slightly. "You're the one who found Alan Pierce, aren't you? She didn't die because of him." Holt leaned forward slightly, responding calmly. "So what do you want to say?" Miller sighed. "I've kept this secret for more than 50 years. There's no time left now," he began to recount. In the summer of 1971, Miller worked as a freelance electrician and had once fixed lights at Elisa's house. She was kind and polite. "I often helped her carry things, and sometimes she offered me tea. I liked her, but that was all." One day, Miller accidentally saw Elisa walking with a young man, Alan Pierce. He looked at me with disdain. I knew there was something between them. On the evening of August 17th, Miller said he passed by Elisa's house to return some tools. The lights were still on. I knocked on the door. No one answered, so I stepped inside. She was crying, holding a letter in her hand. She said Pierce was threatening to reveal something between them. I advised her to report it to the police, but she got angry and told me not to interfere. I got upset. She pushed me away. I swung my hand to brush her off, and she fell, her head hitting the table. He paused, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just heard a crack." Then she lay still. Holt asked softly, "What did you do after that?" Miller looked down at his trembling hands. I panicked, checked her pulse. She was still breathing faintly. I thought about calling an ambulance, but I was afraid of being charged. I covered her with a blanket and left. On the way out, I ran into Pierce. He asked, "Where is she?" I just shook my head. He gave a cold smile and said, "Then let's forget about this." Miller believed that Pierce had returned, staged the scene, and hid the body. The next morning, the car was gone. I knew he had taken her away, but I was scared, so I stayed silent. Holt asked, "Why are you speaking now?" Miller looked her straight in the eye. "Because I'm about to die, and because I see her face in my dreams. She keeps asking, 'Why didn't you save me?'" Then he pulled a yellowed piece of paper from his pocket, a sketch of the layout of Elisa's house. In the bottom corner was an X mark. "Look here, in the old basement. I think Pierce buried her right in the house." Holt brought the confession back to Princeton. A week later, the forensics team excavated the basement area of the old house on Alexander Road. Beneath a layer of concrete, they discovered scraps of fabric and a few bone fragments, the remains of a body. DNA testing confirmed it was Elisa Mae Quinn. She had never left the house where she disappeared. When the discovery was announced, the media called it Princeton's final confession. Holt appeared at the press conference, her voice calm but choked. "Thanks to Jacob Miller's belated testimony, we have found Elisa. The truth is sometimes not simple. It's a combination of mistakes and fear." 2 months later, Jacob Miller died in prison, before he could go to trial. In an envelope sent to Holt, he left a few scribbled lines. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted her to be brought home." Attached was a small piece of copper wire, from the last coil I used in her house. In May 2024, Elisa Mae Quinn's funeral was held by Lake Carnegie, where it all began. Hundreds attended, including former students, Frank Marino's family, and investigators who had pursued the case. Holt placed a bouquet of white daisies on the casket, whispering, "Now you're home." Beside her, Dale Weaver, now frail and aged, bowed his head, tears falling. During the ceremony, Paul Marino, Frank's son, read the eulogy. "My father once wrote, 'If one day the lake returns the truth, remember that justice may walk slowly, but it never stops.' Today I believe he was right." The crowd fell silent, only the wind blowing over the lake remaining. That afternoon, as people left, Holt stood alone by the water's edge. The sunset reflected on the rippling waves, a gentle breeze carrying damp mist. In her mind echoed Jacob Miller's voice, hoarse, weak but real. "I just wanted her to be brought home." And she understood that, though his mistakes could not be erased, thanks to that final confession, the truth had been completed. Holt closed her eyes gently, feeling as if someone were standing beside her in the air. She smiled. "We've found you, Elisa." In the distance, candlelight from the memorial lingered on the lake's surface, like small lights refusing to go out, proof that justice sometimes arrives late, but still in time for the dead to rest and the living to be freed. In the summer of 2024, just a few weeks after Elisa Mae Quinn's funeral, the New Jersey State Police launched the final sweep of the old house on Alexander Road. Though the case was closed, Lieutenant Karen Holt still believed there's something left unsaid. She remembered Jacob Miller's words in his statement before dying. He came back, cleaned everything up, but couldn't erase it all. That very sentence prompted Holt to request a warrant to re-excavate the entire plot around the house, where Elisa lived, died, and was forgotten for over half a century. In July, the forensics team set up white tents around the basement area, the summer sun blazing on the old brick roof. Princeton residents stood silently at the street's end, watching. The house was like a speaking witness, and Holt believed it still held echoes of the past. After 3 days of work, the technical team discovered a discolored wall patch, seemingly plastered with fresh cement. When the bricks were removed, a hollow cavity appeared inside. From it they pulled out a small wooden box, sealed with copper nails. Holt put on gloves and opened the lid. Inside was a cassette tape, a few black and white photos, a broken silver necklace, and a neatly folded piece of paper. On the paper was handwriting later, confirmed to belong to Alan Pierce. "If anyone finds this, understand that I didn't mean to kill her." The entire team fell silent. Holt placed the cassette into a player. Static hissed. Then a young male voice echoed in the enclosed space. "That night, I came to apologize. Jacob was already there." I heard arguing, then silence. "When I entered, she was lying still. I was scared. I was stupid. I just wanted her to be at peace. I was wrong." The end was choked with sobs. The tape stopped abruptly, but it was enough to confirm. The speaker was Alan Pierce. Everyone stood stunned. After more than 50 years, the final truth had been unearthed. Not from a courtroom, but from a worn-out recording. Audio and handwriting analysis confirmed its authenticity. Holt looked at the trembling cassette in her hand, emotions surging, not victory, but a quiet sadness, because this truth could no longer hold anyone accountable, nor grant forgiveness to anyone. Among the remaining evidence, the black and white photos silenced everyone even more. One showed Elisa sitting by Lake Carnegie, smiling brightly, with pencil writing in the corner. "Light reflected on the waters, where I keep your secret." Those words were like Pierce's belated confession, the man who had lived the rest of his life in torment. The silver necklace, identified as Elisa's, was the only remnant of that long-ago struggle. Holt said softly, "This isn't evidence, it's the final words of conscience." That evening, Holt sat alone in her office, listening to the tape again. Pierce's voice trembled. "If there's an afterlife, I hope you understand." Each sound pierced the half-century silence, like a stab. When the tape ended, Holt looked at Elisa's photo on the wall and whispered, "You've been heard." The excavation results were announced at the end of July. Before the reporters' cameras, Holt held the sealed wooden box on the podium. "We have found the final evidence. The truth is no longer buried." Her voice was calm, but her eyes brimmed with emotion. The press called this discovery the last proof, the final evidence in the Elisa Quinn case. The Princeton community fell silent once more. Radio stations replayed the voice from the tape, bringing tears to many. A university professor wrote in the newspaper, "It was a confession not heard with the ears, but with the heart." The elementary school, where Elisa once taught, held a prayer vigil. Former students, lighting candles under her gentle teacher's photo, the small golden flames flickering like the light reflected in Lake Carnegie. A few days later, Holt brought the box to the Mercer County Historical Museum, where it was displayed in the Justice and Memory exhibit. Beneath the glass case, a small label read, "Evidence from the Elisa Mae Quinn case, 1971, 2024. Holt looked through the glass, a mix of fulfillment and sorrow rising in her heart. Finally, the journey of more than half a century had truly ended. No more to search for, no more waiting. Late that night, Holt returned to Lake Carnegie. The summer breeze blew gently, the water's surface flat as a mirror. She took Elisa's photo from her pocket and placed it lightly on the bridge railing. "It's over now, Elisa," she said softly. "You're at rest, and we're at peace." A gust of wind passed, rippling the water. Moonlight reflected in long streaks, like thousands of tiny mirrors drifting. Holt closed her eyes, imagining she heard a very faint laugh, gentle, distant. In that moment, she understood. The Elisa Mae Quinn case didn't close with justice alone, but with forgiveness. The final evidence, not in the wooden box, but in the hearts of those who kept the promise to pursue the truth to the end. On August 15, 2024, exactly 53 years since Elisa Mae Quinn disappeared, the New Jersey State Police held an official press conference at the Mercer headquarters. On the podium, Lieutenant Karen Holt stepped up, behind her the words, "Case 71, 482, Final resolution. The room was silent, only the click of cameras audible. Below were rows of seats filled with reporters, forensics representatives, and those who had been involved in the case for years, including former Lieutenant Dale Weaver and Paul Marino, son of the late investigator Frank Marino. Holt spoke slowly. Today we officially close the file on the Elisa Mae Quinn case, after 53 years of investigation. This is not just a case, but a journey of people who believe justice never sleeps. On the screen behind her, images appeared of the wooden box and cassette tape, found in the recent excavation. Holt continued, "The voice on the tape is Alan Pierce's, the victim's former student. He admitted to accidentally causing her death during a struggle, then hiding the body with Jacob Miller. Forensics confirm this confession is true." The room sank into silence. A reporter stood and asked, "So what was the specific cause of death for the victim?" Holt replied concisely, "Traumatic brain injury from impact. No signs of intent to kill. It was an accident leading to concealment." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held deep sorrow. She continued the presentation with an old photo of Elisa, the 28-year-old woman, with a gentle smile. "We're not just closing a case, we're giving back a name to the lost. For years she was just the number 71,482. Now we can call her by her right name." In the audience rows, Dale Weaver bowed his head, hands clenched, while Paul Marino teared up looking at the photo of the woman his father had pursued his whole life. Holt paused for a beat, then said, "On behalf of those no longer here, Frank Marino, Dale Weaver, and all who kept this file from being forgotten. They proved that justice isn't in conviction, but in finding the truth." Those words brought prolonged applause from the room. Another reporter asked, "Does the town have any memorial plans for the victim?" Holt nodded. "Next week a memorial plaque for Elisa Mae Quinn will be erected by Lake Carnegie, where the story began and ended. On it will be engraved the Marino family's words, 'Justice doesn't disappear, it just sleeps a very long time.'" Next Holt invited Paul Marino to speak. He stepped up, holding his father's old pen, his voice trembling but clear. "My father once said, some cases never close. People just stop looking. Today he can rest easy." The entire room stood in applause. When order was restored, Holt continued, "Thanks to advances in DNA technology and genealogical analysis, this case has found closure. It's proof that no sin disappears. It just waits until science and people are patient enough to listen." She thanked the forensics team for their tireless work, and the Princeton residents, who kept Elisa's memory alive through half a century. A final reporter asked, "Lieutenant Holt, as the final lead investigator, what was the most important thing in this case?" Holt was silent, for a few seconds, then replied, "Giving back a name to the one who vanished. No one deserves to be forgotten, just because too much time has passed." She looked up at the screen, where white text read, "Elisa Mae Quinn, 1943-1971, finally home." The light on Elisa's face silenced the room. In that moment, everyone felt as if the young teacher from years ago was still smiling, that gentle smile that so many in Princeton remembered forever. The press conference ended in a long round of applause. Holt stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with each person. Weaver approached, his voice hoarse. "You did it, Karen." She smiled, replying softly, "Not just me, all of us." Outside the Mercer building, the late afternoon light glowed golden on the trees. Holt paused for a few seconds, before getting in the car, breathing in the summer breeze deeply. A feeling of relief mixed with emptiness washed over her. Justice has come, she thought, but the price was half a century of waiting. That afternoon, a special TV news broadcast aired titled, "The Final Resolution." 53 years later, images of Holt speaking interspersed with serene shots of Lake Carnegie at sunset. The anchor concluded, "Justice doesn't always come from the courts, but from those who refuse to forget." That night, Holt returned home and placed her old police badge on the table. Beside it was the photo of Elisa she always carried. She wrote a few final lines in her journal. August 15, 2024. The Elisa Mae Quinn case officially closed, but the memory remains. She closed the book and looked out the window. Moonlight reflected on the glass, soft and clear, like the light Elisa had painted in her last picture. Holt smiled faintly. "We've kept the promise, Elisa." Outside, wind from Lake Carnegie blew through, carrying the sound of water and leaves, like the final reply from a soul that had finally rested after 53 years of waiting. After the press conference on August 15, 2024, The name Elisa Mae Quinn echoed throughout Princeton once again, not as the symbol of a tragic case, but as proof of justice's endurance. Local newspapers ran the simple front-page headline, "Elisa Comes Home." Townsfolk brought flowers and candles to place around Carnegie Lake, where a new memorial plaque had just been erected. Engraved on it were the words, "Justice doesn't disappear, it just sleeps for a very long time." As dusk fell, hundreds of candle flames reflected on the water's surface, creating a serene, sacred scene, like a belated farewell to the young teacher from long ago. For the entire week that followed, the small town was filled with images of Elisa. Photos of her were posted on shop windows, library hallways, and in the classroom where she once taught. Her former students, now silver-haired adults, organized a memorial at the old elementary school. They placed a smiling photo of their teacher amid bouquets of white daisies, surrounded by drawings of light, the lake, symbols of memory. One said, "She taught us that light always exists, even in the darkness. Now we understand." The school established the Elisa Mae Quinn Memorial Scholarship Fund, awarded to students researching art and justice. In a thank you letter to the Mercer County Police Department, the principal wrote, "Thank you for returning our teacher's image, not as a victim, but as an inspiration." On social media, thousands shared the case's journey, using the hashtag #JusticeForElisa. A woman in Boston wrote, "This story makes me believe that truth always finds its way." Articles about the case spread widely, not out of curiosity, but from emotion. At the Mercer County Police Headquarters, Lieutenant Karen Holt and the investigative team held a small memorial. She placed Elisa's photo next to the wooden box containing the cassette tape, the final piece of evidence. Holt's voice was warm and low. "We've closed the case, but not the lesson. Every cold file is a life yet to be told." The room fell silent, with only the sound of wind through the window and the dim light of a single candle. Former Lieutenant Dale Weaver, despite his frail health, attended the memorial by the lake. He sat on a wooden bench, gazing at the plaque, his trembling hand touching the engraved name of Elisa. When a reporter asked his thoughts, he simply said, "I once thought this case was the failure of my life. Now it's not. Truth just comes late, but it comes." National media covered it too. Time magazine published an article titled, "The Case That Wouldn't Die." The author described the 53-year journey as a dialogue between perseverance and scientific progress. A historian commented, "Elisa Mae Quinn has become a symbol of the new era of justice, where technology and humanity meet in the belief that truth always survives." On August 22, a public memorial was held by Carnegie Lake. More than 300 people attended, former students, reporters, police, and townsfolk. The simple stage featured only candlelight and Elisa's photo. Holt spoke briefly, "We're not here to revisit the tragedy, but to honor the memory. Elisa has been found, and she helps us believe in justice." In the rows of seats below, many quietly wiped away tears. As night fell, everyone released flowers into the lake. White daisy petals drifted lazily on the water, reflecting the moonlight. Paul Marino, Frank's son, read a tribute. "My father once said, if the lake returns the truth, it also returns peace to those who seek it. Today we've seen that." Holt looked around, seeing familiar faces, investigators, forensic experts, and townsfolk who had contributed small clues to the case. They all stood in the candlelight, silent but with eyes aglow. In that moment, Holt realized that the Elisa Mae Quinn case wasn't just one person's story, but a community's people who believed in justice, even if they had to wait half a century. As the ceremony ended, Carnegie Lake grew quiet, the night wind carrying a faint scent of daisies. Holt lingered alone, placing her hand on the stone plaque, and whispering, "We've done it, Elisa." Moonlight stretched across the water like a path to peace, and in the breeze she seemed to hear a very soft voice, light as breath, "Everything will be okay." That night, Princeton sank into stillness, no more doubts, no more shadows, just memories and light. For those who had lived through the case, they knew a part of Elisa's soul would remain here forever, in the moonlight reflecting on Carnegie Lake, where justice had finally found its way back. After the memorial by Carnegie Lake, the name Elisa Mae Quinn was no longer just Princeton's private memory, but a symbol of delayed justice across America. Universities invited Lieutenant Karen Holt to speak about the 53-year investigation. In each lecture, she said little about techniques, emphasizing one thing: behind every file is a person, and everyone deserves to have their name found again. That quote was reprinted in countless papers, becoming the message of the Elisa Quinn effect, a wave of reinvestigations into hundreds of cold cases in other states. New Jersey established the Northeast Regional Cold Case Investigation Unit, using the Elisa case procedure as a model. Young investigators learned to combine genealogical data, DNA, and voice recognition technology, the method that had authenticated Alan Pierce's tape. In just 1 year, the unit helped reopen 17 old cases. A young officer said on TV, "If Princeton could wait 53 years, every case is worth continuing." The media called the Elisa case the resurrection of justice in the data age. Time magazine wrote, "The young teacher's death didn't end in sorrow, but opened a new era of faith and truth." Many editorials saw it as a prime example of the blend between science and determination. In Princeton, Elisa's legacy was preserved in simple ways. The elementary school where she taught renamed its library, the Elisa Quinn Light Library, hanging a plaque engraved with her words, "Teach children to see the good even when adults can't." Every year, sixth graders held a reading event by Carnegie Lake, retelling the story of their teacher, who was found after half a century missing. Holt and Paul Marino, son of the late investigator Frank, appeared together in the 2025 documentary The Teacher, by the Lake. The film recreated the quest for justice, ending with Holt's words, "Justice isn't perfect, but it always finds its way back." When it aired, millions left comments thanking the team. Many families sent letters saying they now had hope to reopen files on missing loved ones. The case's impact spread to science too. A group of biotech students, inspired by Holt, launched Project 711482, researching recovery of degraded DNA from long-age samples. In 2026, they helped identify 3 unidentified victims in Pennsylvania, dubbed by the press as 3 souls returned their names thanks to Elisa Quinn's legacy. For Holt, the greatest legacy wasn't in files or awards. In an interview she said, "What I remember most are the nights by Carnegie Lake, when the wind blew and I felt like someone was listening. I believe Elisa never left, she just waited until we were ready to hear her story." At the end of 2024, Holt retired after more than 30 years of service. On her last day at the station, she took only the notebook with the case's first entry and a yellowed photo of Elisa. On her desk she left a handwritten note, "If a case keeps you up at night, don't be afraid. It means your heart is still working." That December, Princeton held the first Elisa Mae Quinn Memorial Day. Church bells rang as dusk settled. Hundreds of paper lanterns were released to float on Carnegie Lake, forming a glowing path reflecting the moon. Amid the crowd, Holt stood still, the wind gently stirring her hair, her eyes following the lanterns drifting away. Though no longer a cop, the unyielding faith still shone in her. Justice may come slow, but it never stops. The legacy of the Elisa Mae Quinn case, in the end, wasn't just a closed file, it was a reminder that every person leaves a trace, in memories in others' hearts, and in the persistent flow of justice. In Princeton, whenever the night wind blew across the lake, people still whispered to each other, "Elisa is still here." Spring dawn of 2025, Carnegie Lake was covered in a thin mist, the first light of day spreading softly over the still water. Karen Holt stood by the lakeshore, holding a cup of coffee, silently gazing at the place that had once been the heart of the Elisa Mae Quinn case. It had been nearly a year since the case closed, but for her it wasn't an end. Every morning, Holt still came here. At the hour the old files said Elisa often went to the lake to sketch. "This is where 2 worlds meet," she had once said, "between the seeker and the sought." Church bells rang, echoing through the thin mist. Holt walked to the gray granite memorial plaque, by the water's edge, where the words were engraved, "Justice doesn't disappear, it just sleeps for a very long time." On the plaque lay a bouquet of white daisies still dusted with dew, perhaps just placed there by someone. Holt bowed her head, whispering softly, "Rest in peace, Elisa. Finally, we've kept our promise." Her voice was as small as a whisper to the wind. A young couple passing by recognized her. The woman said, "You're the one who found the truth, right? I was born after the case, but grew up with the story. It makes us believe in justice." Holt smiled, "Thank those who never gave up." They walked away, leaving her alone amid the gradually lifting mist. The sun rose higher, golden light spreading across the lake. Early birds took flight, creating rippling circles that spread outward. Holt breathed deeply, feeling the chill fade, replaced by gentle warmth. In her mind echoed familiar voices of Frank Marino, Dale Weaver, of Elisa herself through the unfinished letter. Everything will be okay. And for the first time, Holt truly believed it was. She sat on the old wooden bench, pulling out the notebook she'd used during the investigation. The first entry read, "Victim Elisa Mae Quinn, missing cause unknown." At the bottom she added "Found, 2024, justice restored." She closed the notebook, placed it on the plaque, and whispered, "Maybe no one will read it, but I want you to know, we didn't forget." Sunlight reflected off the stone plaque, making the name Elisa Mae Quinn, 1943, 1971 glow brightly. Holt stood looking around. Everything was peaceful. The bird song, the wind and the morning light blended together, as if all of nature were breathing as one. Before leaving, Holt glanced back. A daisy petal on the plaque fluttered down to the water, rippling small circles. In the sunlight, the lake sparkled as if smiling. She whispered, "Good morning, Elisa." Then she turned and walked away, her small figure fading into the mist. Behind her, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the plaque and Carnegie Lake, where justice had finally been found, and Elisa's light remained forever. The story of Elisa Mae Quinn doesn't just close a cold case in Princeton, it touches on very American questions today: how we preserve our shared memories, how we use technology, and how we treat each other in moments prone to mistakes. Lieutenant Karen Holt's persistence for over half a century, then joining the community to light candles at Carnegie Lake and erect a plaque, "Justice doesn't disappear, it just sleeps for a very long time," reminds us that justice in the United States largely relies on tenacious citizens, those willing to store documents, keep photos, retell stories in families and neighborhoods. Alan Pierce's cassette tape and Jacob Miller's belated confession show how silence out of fear can turn an accident into a tragedy that lingers for an entire community. The practical lesson is that when you witness something unusual, a neighbor's argument, someone disappearing after their daily routine, call 911, report to the police, or a hotline. Don't let wait and see turn into missed opportunity. The truth uncovered through DNA, genealogy, and voice authentication also reminds us to use technology properly, store medical records, consent to sharing genetic data responsibly, and understand that algorithms are only useful when there are people like Holt connecting scattered pieces with compassion. The memorials, Elisa Mae Quinn scholarships, documentary film, and local commemoration day prove that a healthy community is one that knows how to turn pain into a moral scaffold for future generations. If you're carrying a heavy secret or a piece of information that keeps you up at night, speak out with family, a lawyer or authorities, because sometimes you are the final puzzle piece. And as Holt wrote in her notebook, if a story still haunts us, it means the heart is still beating. That's the starting point to turn memory into light. Thank you for joining us on the entire journey to reclaim the light of justice for Elisa Mae Quinn. A story that shows the truth, even if buried, will one day be revealed. Hit subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next Decoded Cold Cases, where the past speaks up and justice is finally found.